Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
So as business owners and podcasters and just content producers, we're busy and we're creating so much content. Most of it is not getting seen. And so the repurposing part and the importance of repurposing the content is so you don't burn out in creating constant content. You don't want to feel like that about your podcast, especially if it's something that lights you up and it's something that is educating your audience. So how can you take that content that you're already creating, that thing that you're already doing on a regular basis, and repurpose it to other places where your audience can then see it that way? So I think it's really important. I definitely agree that it is an underused strategy. Even though we talk about it a lot in the online space, it's still something that a lot of us struggle with.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Alesia Galati, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping overwhelmed clients make space for what matters. Join me each episode as we explore ways to live a more proactive, productive life with topics and guests that speak to simplifying self-awareness, systems, and so much more. I understand overwhelm personally as a fellow multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Alesia, and if you've listened to the podcast before, you know I repeat myself a lot, and there's a good reason for that. When we're trying to get a message out into the world, we need to say it way more than once in order for it to be seen or heard, let alone for it to be absorbed and create impact. So as creators, and specifically podcasters, we need to find ways to do that without burning ourselves out in the process. Back in episode 54 of the podcast, 80 episodes and over 12,000 downloads ago, if you can believe that, I talked with Young Pratt about repurposing content, and in that episode, I referenced one of my favorite phrases, don't reinvent the wheel, and I still stand by that. We need to work smarter and get creative with what we've already done. And in today's episode, my incredible podcast producer, Alesia Galati, joins me to share tons of ideas with you on how to do that. Alesia runs a full-service podcast management company, meaning you record and her team does the rest. She helps business owners launch and maintain lead-generating podcasts, just like this one. She lives in sunny North Carolina with her husband, 2 small boys, and a rescue pup. When she's not working, you can find her either hiking, chasing her kids around, or watching the latest Star Wars with her husband. And in today's episode, Alesia shares 3 ways you can repurpose your podcast content. One you might guess, creating alternate content with it, and that one is important and effective. But the other 2 will really get you thinking about ways to maximize all the work you've done. Alesia's tips include many examples of how to approach each way, how to tie in marketing and SEO, and she even weighs in on the age-old feud in the podcasting world about putting your podcast on YouTube. Our conversation is packed with such good advice, but remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Be sure to save this episode, listen to it more than once, and for now, choose one thing that strikes you as a good place to start and try it. One of the examples I use in our conversation is the Positively Productive Resources Vault, which includes additional support and training in the form of short videos, worksheets, and workbooks. Not only do you access the worksheets I use with clients, as well as mini trainings and other bonuses, you also have links to relevant podcast episodes built into each module, so you don't have to go searching for them. If you'd like access to that vault, head to positivelyproductive.com/vault, where the promo code podcast will give you a very special listener discount. Now let's join Alesia and find out the 3 ways we can repurpose our podcast content. Welcome to the Positively Living podcast, or should I say, welcome back, Alesia Galati. I am so excited for this conversation today.
It's going to be good. Hello. Thank you. I'm just excited to be back.
It is. It's been too long, and we got to catch up, especially if we're comparing how many times you've allowed me to join you on your podcast, Listeners to Leads. So I can't wait to get into this. But before we do, please catch everybody up. Tell us a bit about who you are, who you help, what's been going on, and of course, most importantly, what lights you up.
Yeah. So I am Alesia Galati and I run a full service podcast management company. We do everything from the editing to the show notes to helping with the social media marketing for the podcast, the strategy behind it, really helping business owners who use their podcast to generate leads, thought leaders who are using it to really show up as experts in their field, and also some nonprofits that are looking to really create awareness around their brand. So those are the people that we tend to work with. I enjoy it. I guess that's what lights me up, other than obviously other things that I enjoy doing in my spare time. But what I love about the podcasting space and being an instrument in producing podcasts is allowing our clients to have a voice in a society. And most of our clients are women and have huge missions behind them, and being able to support them in having their voice heard in a time when women's voices tend to be not heard is just really awesome. And I love being able to be a part of that.
And I celebrate that on so many levels with you. So first of all, that mission alone makes me very happy. And I get excited about having women guests on my podcast for that reason, to be able to give them a platform. And I know people like Carol Cox, who was on here, and Diane Diaz, speaking your brand, right? Speaking up for what you believe in, you help us do that. And speaking of us, I'm one of the people you help. And I have given you shout outs before, but I'm going to do it again. I'm so excited that you and I kind of kicked this off together, because when you were last on here, you were sharing the story of how you had to pivot and jump into this. And this is definitely where you're meant to be. And I really believe we've built something special here. So just giving you a little gratitude right off the bat. And now, with this in mind, we have this wonderful anchor content, and for podcasts that are, intended to be lead generating and have a purpose in getting that message out there, you want to be efficient with them. So the idea of repurposing content is tossed around, but I wanted to dig in with you because you have 3 ways that I don't think we necessarily think of. So let's start first with repurposing content and why we need to, why we don't, what's going on there.
So as business owners and podcasters and just content producers, we're busy and we're creating so much content. Most of it is not getting seen. And so the repurposing part and the importance of repurposing the content is so you don't burn out in creating constant content. I don't want you guys to feel like, oh my God, I'm doing all these things and I have to show up again for this weekly show. You don't want to feel like that about your podcast, especially if it's something that lights you up and it's something that is educating your audience. So how can you take that content that you're already creating, that thing that you're already doing on a regular basis, and repurpose it to other places where your audience can then see it that way? So I think it's really important. I definitely agree that it is an underused strategy. Even though we talk about it a lot in the online space, it's still something that a lot of us struggle with.
What I've seen in terms of the clients that I work with and looking at it from the productivity side of things, right, is okay, this is a great way to be more productive and more efficient by repurposing. So it's like, when that doesn't happen, what's the fear behind it? What I've seen is the whole idea of, I don't want to repeat myself. And you just said most of it's not being seen.
Yeah. Especially on social media, there's so much churn in content. And I say churn because my background's in manufacturing and inventory. So I'm thinking inventory churning, right? But you're only going to have visibility on that post for a couple minutes a day at most, really, on the social media platforms, including ones like LinkedIn, where you might get maybe a week or 2 with that content. But for the most part, you're looking at anywhere from seconds to at most a day. And you're competing not only with other people's content on the platforms, but you're competing with the varying interests and things that grab the user's attention. So, like, we're both moms, and if I'm on my phone scrolling Instagram or scrolling whatever, even if I'm on my phone reading, I literally will have my kids come up to me, Mom, this, Mom, that. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm reading. Leave me alone. You don't need it right away. Be nice to your brother. Like, but there's so many things pulling our attention, even outside of the platform. Being able to repurpose your content really helps you be able to stand out. And most of the time, people need to see things repeatedly in order for it to stick. And I think this is where we can get a little like, oh, but I just talked about this, or I just said this. I constantly say on my show, you guys hear me say this all the time. And I'm repeating myself all the time. And that's okay because it might be that millionth time that I finally say it again that it hits home. And that's impactful, right? And that's exciting. So don't feel like, oh, well, I've said it X amount of times. You might have people who are showing up randomly on the most random place, whether that's social media or your podcast or wherever, and your content. And all of a sudden it sparks that thing for them to take that step, to take action and get a result, right? So I think that it's, like I said, it's such an underused strategy.
It's so true. And I will give you a classic example that just happened to me. It happened on Instagram of all things, but at least monthly, I tend to check in and do some kind of goofy post that's a get to know me to let people know, what a Harry Potter fan I am and how much I love donkeys. And if you hang out with me, you'll get to know these things. But, I just wanted a general overview of here's some things about me and I'd love to know about you, right? So I post a goofy reel with this information. I'm not even kidding when I tell you the information I'm posting is the same because I haven't changed. Okay. I'm like, this is all the same stuff about me as before. And I had someone who worked with me years ago, multiple times, and follows me regularly on Instagram, actually comment today and say, oh, it's so good getting to know these things about you.
Yeah.
So all this to say, we're competing with a lot, not the least of which is people's just distractibility, let alone all the other things being posted. So don't be afraid to say it again and again. And when it comes to an important message, people need to hear it.
Yeah.
With that in mind, that's the why we want to do this. So let's talk about your 3 ways we can do this, because I love that it goes beyond the one that I had in mind. So I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So the first one is one that I don't think people think of at all, and that is repurposing your podcast content into more episodes.
Yes.
This is one where it's like, wait a minute. What? So this is what I like to call going deep instead of wider with your content. When you're able to go deeper, you are creating even more of a connection with your audience rather than broadening it to include more people. So you're going to get better results and better communication and connection with your listeners if you do this. And 2 ways that you can do that is, one, having past guests back on your show to talk further about a topic, like what we're doing today, right? So before we were talking about podcasting, using podcasts, great. Now let's take it a step further, build on what we've already talked about, and take the audience a little deeper, right? This is something that I think is really good, especially for people who are past that 100, 150 episodes for their podcast. Because at that point, most of the time you've had a pretty decent chunk of guests on, and you might be at the point where you're like, should I continue podcasting? Who can I talk to? What can I talk to them about? Look back at those first 50 episodes. Who were those guests that you had on? What did you talk about? Have things changed for them? And can you talk to them about it that it would be beneficial for your audience? I think this one is one where it's like, wait a minute, what? This is such a great idea. So please take the idea, run with it. And the second way that you can do the using your podcast content to create more episodes is to look through solo episodes that you have done and see where you can go deeper with the topic. I'd also like to add, if there was a topic that a guest talked about where maybe you don't know that it makes sense to have the guest back on, maybe you have a different take or you feel like you really want to drive this point home, go ahead and make a solo episode about that. There is so much room for creative liberty with a podcast. You aren't following a script. It's not like it's a course where it's like I have to take them from point A to point B within a certain amount of time. It's conversational. It's a continuously evergreen flow of content. So feel free to do whatever you want with it. So, an example of looking at past episodes and seeing where you can go deeper, and this is also where I like to talk about like going into the data, making sure that you're looking at what's working and what's not. I was looking at my Google Analytics for my podcast, and I saw that the people who were getting served my show based on what they were searching, most of them were searching about podcast statistics, which I've talked about on my show before. Cool. Then I realized that was last year. I haven't done an episode on podcast statistics in a year. So, how can I take the content that I talked about then and go deeper? That episode was podcast stats and how to understand them, how to use them, gaining information from them. This new one that I created was using your podcast statistics to make better decisions. So, yes, it was talking about the same types of things, but it was going a little deeper for the more seasoned podcaster who's not just like, I just started. What do my stats mean? I don't understand, right? This is for people who are like, I'm established, not really sure what these statistics are meaning for me. How can I make better decisions for my show using this? So, that's a great example of taking content that you've already created, going deeper.
Yeah, and that going deeper doesn't mean that you are letting go of what you've already done. You compile this wonderful collection of a specific topic. And one of the things that I will do, and you hear this all the time, is say, okay, and if you like this, it's a little bit like Amazon does, right? If you like this, you might like that. But it's more like, I know I like to binge listen. I like to hear things repeatedly. And I know that about myself. So I get excited when I hear an episode on something and they're like, yeah, and we also covered it, in this and this episode, and you can go listen to that. And I'm like, yeah. And because every time you have the conversation, it's so organic. There's always going to be a slightly different angle, a slightly different concept that's brought up. And somewhere in there will be your aha moments. Love that. And what I love about this idea is that you're repurposing the content in terms of the conceptual content, not the actual content. Though I suppose you could get creative if you wanted to and take snippets of actual audio or whatever and say, I don't know. I mean, it's up to you. It's your rules, but this is really just taking the content in terms of the topics themselves. And I love it.
Yeah, we have one client where she's doing a year-end wrap-up of top tips from past guests. And so she is going through and giving us timestamps of the audio that she wants to pull for this roundup of, I think it's about 10 guests that she's planning on doing. And so you can definitely, like, I'm sure she's going to have at the beginning say, this is what my wrap-up is from this year. This is what I learned this year. These are my top lessons. Let's go ahead and listen to what our guests have to say about it, and then pulling that. So there are so many different ways. And you, like I said before, you have so much creative liberty with your podcast because it's yours. Unless you're like part of a network or, someone's demanding that you do it a certain way. Most of us aren't. We have that liberty.
Love it. Okay, that was number 1. What's the second way?
So the second way is by repurposing podcast content into just more general content. And a few ways that you've probably heard this is weekly emails, social content, blog posts, Pinterest, graphics or infographics, anything like that where you're literally just taking what you've already created and then just sharing that to different platforms and ensuring that it's showing up. One of the things that I see people do so often in podcasting is they'll put their podcast episode out into the world and then they're like, sit back and wait for the money to come rolling in and the listens and the downloads. That's not how anything works. My background's in marketing. It's not how it works. I'm sorry to say that you have to put in effort to bring awareness to your show. That can also, and this is a little hot tip for anyone who is a podcaster looking to repurpose their content, take an episode and talk about that same content on someone else's show. Why not do that, right? Like, just because your audience heard it doesn't mean that their audience heard it. And that way, it's very clear to the listeners on that new show, this is what they're about. This is the kind of content I can expect on their podcast. Awesome. Moving forward, I'm going to listen to their show too. If you want to grow your show, you have to be sharing it other places. It's important that you guest on other podcasts. Like, these are very strategic ways to get those downloads you're looking for, expand your audience.
I got to tell you too that the reverse absolutely works, because while I've been out there sharing more on other podcasts, and I'm an external processor, so when I'm having these conversations, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll describe it this way, and I hit upon something. Or sometimes a host will ask certain questions or will come at it from a new angle, and I'll be like, now that's interesting, and I'll come back around and do it on my show. And some of my solo episodes have absolutely been informed by that kind of conversation. So you're right. There's a lot of inspiration that comes from that. Okay. So with this general content, the emails, I think that seems pretty straightforward. You have the socials, the blogs, things like that. Any tips in terms of how you would want to modify that content? Do you want to take the transcript and use some of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so some basic ways that we recommend people repurpose a single podcast episode is to take a audio snippet and turn it into an audiogram or a reel. You can always have it where it has the subtitles there, so that's always fun. You can put video in the background, so that way Instagram is happy, TikTok's happy, things like that. You can also just face your camera to you and say, on this week's episode, we talked about boom, 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 and then say, make sure you go take a listen. That way it's done natively on the app if you're looking for that. You can take quotables and create static graphics for those. One thing I really love doing for episodes that I think is also underused is taking a question that engages with your audience. So for this conversation, saying, how are you repurposing your podcast content? How are you repurposing content? How do you feel about repurposing? Questions like that, where it gets your audience like, oh, I love to repurpose. Oh, I hate repurposing. Like, you're going to get some responses. And so having that question either go live right before your episode, that way it drums up excitement for it, during or after, or even weeks later, if you are looking to get more action on that episode, getting that excitement back up about the content that you've already created. For the blog post, we usually just say, take the show notes that you're writing, especially if they're very thorough show notes, descriptive show notes, add those to your website, add the embed code for your player. Google's going to see that they're all matched and married and that they're all connected, and the backlinks really help. So making sure that you're doing that from a search engine optimization standpoint, that's going to be really important going into the future of podcasting. So definitely make sure that you are doing everything you can to ensure that the SEO and the show notes of your episodes are very thorough. But if you're like, okay, well, I don't want to re-listen to an episode of myself for those DIYers. I don't like listening to myself either. I get it. Like, it's okay. Read through the transcript. See what pops out from just reading it. Like, ooh, did I say that? I don't remember saying that. Awesome. That was gold. And then pull that if you're someone who does not want to hear yourself talk. I get it.
While you're talking about these different ways that you can pull content, pull snippets of content, one of the things that I want to mention that I absolutely love, and this is something that you do as part of your service, is finding those pull quotes. Like I tell my guests, I'm like, there are going to be moments of brilliance. There are going to be many, but we're going to pull one especially that really calls out what we're doing here. And I have a collection of quotes now. Who knew? Like, I used to quote other people. Now I quote myself. It's kind of awkward, but I'm okay with it. So that's another fantastic way to do it. And I absolutely love that. And then what you're talking about with like taking the concept of the episode and maybe a portion of the episode, or you could use like some of what you said as part of the write-up. A great example of that, when I had ways in which we procrastinate and how you can kind of make it work for you. And I had that as an episode. And then I wrote an email about it and I had, 7 different reasons why we procrastinate. And I mean, it got a lot of traction because that's something everybody's like, yep, we all have that in common. Yeah, let's talk about that. But then you can point to the episode and be like, hey, you want to chat about it some more? Let's get to it.
Yeah, I think this is a great point. I know I have 2 examples of podcast episodes that I've created where I have repurposed them into future content in a very strategic way. So the first episode was called The Future of Podcasting. Now, this is a topic that's obviously very, very important to podcasters. And so I knew I want to optimize this as much as I can. I want to maximize this as much as I can. So the first thing I did was I wrote up a client report. And now this is going to go into the client's annual report at the end of the year. And I can say, here is your exclusive report. I'm putting it elsewhere also, guys. Like, it's okay. Like, here's your exclusive report. This is what's happening in the podcasting space. Here are the statistics. And here are 5 things that I'm seeing as the future of podcasting, specifically for business owners, right? So like a lot of the general future of podcasting stuff is like, well, what about sponsors? And what about this? And where's the money going? And like, yes, and because most of our clients are using their podcast to generate leads for their own business. Sponsors aren't a big factor. So where should they focus when everyone's yelling downloads and sponsors? So being able to share that is so important. So taking that episode, I took the transcript, took my notes, and just made a very thorough client report. So that's going to go in the annual report. I turned it into a blog post by taking out certain things that was like, hey, you're a client, so you get this. Obviously, the blog readers are not clients. They don't get that. But I was able to say, if you're looking for support in this, book a call. Let's talk about it. We have strategy sessions. So having a blog post. Then I turned that blog post into a LinkedIn article. One of my strategies for next year is to be more engaged on LinkedIn and connecting with more people. And so having a baseline of credibility is going to be really important for that. And so articles like this are going to be really good for showing that I'm credible, that I know what I'm talking about. So turn that into a LinkedIn article. Then I turned it into an Instagram carousel and I shared that as, here are my 5 things that I see happening, a little snippet on it. Tune into the podcast episode if you want to hear everything. But literally, if someone does not listen to the episode, they're still going to get those 5 things that I see being the future of podcasting. My next plan that I have not done yet is creating a freebie download report. So taking that client report style, so PDF style, and saying, download your free report on what's happening in podcasting in 2023. Then I get more emails, people get this download, this thing that I've already created, and all I had to do was speak it. Yes, I made some notes and I did some like data research.
And bring your expertise, but whatevs.
Yes. But like, I was able to take the one podcast episode and then turn that into very strategic content that I'm able to use. So that's one example. Another example is an episode where it's called 15 Ways to Improve Your Podcast Results. So I came up with 15 ways. I'm like, yep, these are important. These are important. These are important. They're in no particular order at all, but they're important, right? I'm going to turn that into a tech tips series or like a podcasting tips series where I'm going to do over the course of a month on weekdays. I'm going to do a reel for each tip. I'm going to do a static post for each tip. And then once I'm done, I'm going to turn them all into an email sequence that then redirects people to download a freebie, or it takes them to, hey, I have workshops. Here's the workshop. Hey, I have a strategy session, wherever. But I'm creating like a series for that. Also, just from like an overall content repurposing standpoint, doing videos sooner than a few months from now, where I am going to have them grouped into 5. So it'll say 5 tips to improve your podcast results, 5 more tips to improve your podcast results, and then 5 more again. So being able to take that and chunk it into sections, because I'm already going to do the single ones later, I figured let's just chunk them up. And then when we do the ones later, we can group them however we want, doing an audiogram and then doing quotables as well. So being able to just take that one episode where it's like, yes, that's important, cool. But like, how can I make the most of that? How can I show that I'm an expert? Show up on social media because that's what they want you to do. Like, how can I do all of these things without being burnt out, without feeling overwhelmed or stressed? And I think that's just like really where it stands, is like taking that one thing that you have, turning it into something new.
And lest we forget, it's so incredibly important, not only for our street cred, but for our sanity, to show up consistently and to be consistent across the board. So by repurposing content, you're being consistent. So before we go on to number 3, which I think I'm especially excited about this one because I had a sneak peek because, I have connections. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you one quick question because it's like a whole thing in podcast land. It's like sort of a love-hate. What's your hot take, if you will, on the whole, okay, I'm going to take my episode, I'm going to use the audio or whatever and slap it up on YouTube and use YouTube's, search engine to my benefit. What's your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts.
I knew you did.
So I actually don't recommend audiogram style YouTube videos. The platform is not made for that. And if YouTube sees that you have a static post with audio in the background, you will not get results. They're most likely going to like shadow ban you. Where anything that you try to do in the future, it's going to take even more effort to show up. When I see these podcast hosting platforms, like where you would upload your podcast, where they have that additional feature where it automatically puts it up on YouTube, I cringe because yes, you want to be in all the places, but YouTube needs its very own strategy. Just like you wouldn't slap your 10-minute podcast episodes on a still frame on TikTok. Every platform needs its own strategy. So you have to be strategic about it. Now, here's the one thing you can do. And we've seen clients do this with pretty decent results. I wouldn't say they're great, but some results is taking a full episode and narrowing it down to 5 to 10 minutes of video conversation that is really valuable. And then title it based on that valuable information that you guys are talking about. Or another thing that you can do is do an actual YouTube video where you go through, like if I were to say, here are 5 ways that you can improve your podcast, then that would be a good YouTube video of me talking through those and having a actual video editor edit them and make it look good for YouTube. So it's not that you can't repurpose it. You just really have to be very strategic about it.
I think that is excellent advice for any of the platforms. Think about what you're doing, but also you can be creative because I will say that I started using the fun reels that I was doing more on LinkedIn, even though at first I was like, no, I'm supposed to be serious over on LinkedIn. And I'm like, no, I'm not serious anywhere I go. This is me showing up authentically. And my engagement skyrocketed. So I'm going to continue to do that. So yeah, it's knowing what's expected of you, or it's not even what's expected of you. That's not the right way to say it. It's knowing what the platform is looking for. There are certain rules, right, to maximize the algorithm. So let's work with that. Know the strategies and use them the correct ways. Love it. Okay, on to number 3.
Yes. So the third one is repurposing podcast content into supplemental content. And so in this one, which is definitely one of my favorites, is you use your podcast content to support the things that you're already doing. So if you have a membership, say you're talking about a certain topic and hey, you've already talked about that on your podcast, you have episodes on it, have your membership members listen to those episodes. One, it gets you more downloads. It allows you to do less work and you can group them all together. Another way is we actually saw this with a course creator where they were able to take, hey, we're talking about pricing your packages this week. We've talked about the mindset behind it already on the podcast. Let's bring that episode in, have them listen to that first before they hop on the course call or before they do that course content. That way they already have that foundation of an idea of where to go. We have clients that do that where they have, Lisa does it, but she'll talk about hers, We have another client where she has a business blueprint and she's gone through her business blueprint on her podcast. And she pulls each section that's really important for people who are about to do it live with her, that live intensive. Listen to these episodes that you're not showing up to the intensive, like, what am I here for? What are we doing? What's this all for? And that way it makes the conversation go so much smoother because you're not explaining these things during the call. You can maximize your time. And so you're just taking those episodes that you've already created, use them to supplement even further connections with your audience. Another way you could do this is, and we see a client do this really well, is she has on her website like a resources library for I'm struggling with this. And then actually stole the idea so you can see it on my website as well. If you're struggling with a certain thing, then these are the episodes that you're going to want to listen to. Here's how you can join a group program for it. Here's how you can get free downloads for this topic. And so she just takes her top 5 solo episodes and then is able to say, here you go. Here's supplemental ways that you can understand this topic. You've already created it. Why not use it to the best of your abilities?
I love that. So the places which I do this, okay, the first, which is probably the most surprising to me, I didn't expect it, but it's very much like the client that you mentioned, pulling out pieces of the business blueprint. Okay, with my clients, we'll have specific topics that we're going over. Sometimes they will come to me and say, I listened to this episode, because they do follow the podcast. And I'm always like, oh, cool. But sometimes it'll be like, okay, we're really struggling with this. One of the most popular ones I would say is the tackle your to-do list in 4 simple steps, right? That's going to come up a lot because we're always going to be talking about to-do lists. And it's like,
Yeah.
have you listened to this? Have you listened to this structure? Do you know the 4 Ds? Then we can talk about that kind of messy middle where you're like, okay, I had the 4 Ds but I got stuck here. And then when we coach, we're making the most of our time because they've already done some of that initial work. So that's brilliant. All right. In terms of resources, I have some free resources, the original worksheets that every one of my clients uses, but I also boosted it into a resources vault that has mini trainings and things like that in it. And in addition to that, I have also added every time there's a connected topic, a link to a podcast episode. So it's a real one-stop shop for someone who goes into the vault and it's like, oh, I can click right here and go to that episode on prioritizing or systems or whatever it is that I'm looking for. And I mean, it's handy, it's popular. Oh, and another one, and we talked about this because I love to maximize Spotify playlists, is I've started creating playlists. Already have the episodes, they're already there. It's easy peasy to add a playlist and to add to a playlist. So now I have like one on, quick productivity tips and it's a fantastic playlist that anybody can, it's right on my website. I can, send it to a client if they want to binge listen, so many different ways. But my favorite part about all this is that the only work that's involved is figuring out where you want to share it, but you don't have to modify a thing. There's no writing, there's no extra graphics unless you want there to be, but it's really about figuring out different ways and places to share it.
Yeah. And I did this with the report that I did for the client report as well as the blog post, being able to have those backlinks to past episodes. And so I just added it as listening resource. And then I just linked the episode right there. And so if I was talking about how the number one way to grow your show is by guesting, this is going to be really important to increase people getting awareness of you and your show. Great. I have an episode called The Number One Way to Grow Your Show. Go listen to that. So I'll give highlights in the annual report, but having those additional resources for people to listen to, I think is so important. And I didn't have to do anything extra to them. Literally just took like 10 to 15 episodes. It was like, yes, all of these are applicable. They're going in.
I love it. And I will add one more example. It's a unique one, but it's a pretty cool situation. One of my number one downloaded episodes with Mallory Jackson on living a trauma-informed life. That episode, she teaches, she's an assistant professor of human services and chemical dependency counseling. And so when she is teaching every semester, she includes those episodes. that she's done with me in the curriculum, like I get reading, listening requirements, if you will. So it's another great way to get that information. I was going to say into the hands, but I guess into the ears of those who could use it. So I love it. Okay. That's 3. Any other thoughts you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
Yeah. Don't feel like you have to do all of these. Pick 1 or 2 things that we talked about today that feel really good and start there. And then come back and listen again if you need to. But don't feel like I have to repurpose in all of these different ways. As you saw, each episode kind of has its own style and strategy behind repurposing based on the content. So really just consider that and don't feel like you have to do it all. That's not at all what we're saying.
Yes. And I mean, even one category that we're talking about here, pick one example in one category that you can do. For example, an easy thing I think would be to think of a really great or perhaps popular episode that you have and just think today about a couple of other places that you could share it.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we'll let everyone know where we can find you before we get into our rapid wrap up.
Yes. So I am the host of the Listeners to Leads podcast. So if you are looking to generate leads with your show, we have lots of episodes over there that are really good, obviously, and lots of guests that are incredible and share their own experiences with podcasting. So there's some interesting insights that you'll find. And you can find me at listenerstoleads.com.
We'll definitely have that information in the show notes. And now let's get to that rapid wrap up. Just fill in the blank for me. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance is...
Right now, and this is like as of last night, because that's how I listen to music. The song that is really lighting me up is Love Myself by Haley Steinfeld. I never remember how to say her last name, but
yeah,
that one is good. I love me. And it's an important reminder.
100%. I've used that in a reel for like self-care related podcast episodes because I love that song so much. Great one. Okay. How about a quote or a mantra that inspires me or that I love to share?
This seems kind of meta, but
do it.
Do less, live more, breathe easy. Lisa's mantra for her podcast, I think I say it even outside of like talking to Lisa, outside of even doing things with her podcast, because I do think it's so important, especially in a society where we're constantly doing so much. And so I love that premise and that motto. So there you go.
Well, thank you. That lights me up. Okay. Now, how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, anything, not even having to do with podcasting, but just that makes my life better is?
The Kindle app.
Oh, yeah.
I love to read, and I read about 250 books a year. And so, yeah, that's my self-care of just enjoying reading. And so I like my Kindle app. It makes my life easier. It makes me a better person too sometimes. So like
makes me so much friendlier. I 100% agree on that one as well. All right. And last, but certainly not least, what are you grateful for today, Alesia?
Today, I'm grateful for my husband. I'm pretty sure I said this last time that I was on the show, but he is so wonderful. He's the stay-at-home dad. He homeschools our kids. And when I told him, hey, I have a podcast interview today, I need you to take the kids out, they're sitting in the car watching cartoons. So like he handles it and I appreciate him for that.
Love that. Well, shout out to him for doing that so that we could do this.
Yes.
So I'm grateful for him. And I'm so, so grateful for you for so many reasons. And in this particular case today, for shining your light so brightly and broadcasting it and helping us broadcast our lights out into the world too. So thank you, Alesia, for being here and for shining that light and for sharing it with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.